I'm not someone who typically spends time on specific X websites, but one July night a few months ago, I not only viewed their content, but also signed up for their premium membership. I thought $100 was a reasonable price. I was watching a live stream featuring an attractive woman. While I've seen better, there was something about this scene that deeply affected me. The woman was referred to as Hot Housewife Jenna, but I knew her real name was Kelly. Turns out, Kelly was my wife. After their closeness, Kelly's partner commented, "Well, darling, that was quite enjoyable. I bet your husband can't make you happy like that, can he?" Kelly, or Hot Housewife Jenna, smiled at him and replied promptly, "Well, Mario, that was indeed enjoyable, but just so you know, no one ignites my passion like my husband. I've been with a few men, but none of them make me as happy as he does. You're good, but he's incredible, so don't stop trying harder." She flashed him another grin. Confused, Mario asked, "If he's so fantastic, why are you cheating on him by being here and letting me be with you?" Kelly maintained her grin and responded, "I didn't plan for it to happen, but I enjoy the excitement. I'm glad you're part of it. I also do it because I can get away with it, and he'll never find out. I truly love my husband with all my heart, and after 3 nights here, I've realized how much better he is than what I get here. It makes me love and appreciate him even more." As I mentioned earlier, that $100 was well spent because I could see what was happening with my beloved wife without the need for costly surveillance equipment or private investigators. You're probably wondering how I ended up here. What led to that night when I visited this site? It's a valid question, and I suppose the most honest answer would be a stroke of luck, a rare twist of fate that came my way. Not luck that my wife was involved with Mario, but rather that I now knew she was being unfaithful. Kelly and I have been married for just over 8 years. We first met during our elementary school days. We both grew up in the vicinity of a small town in central Illinois. While she lived in town, I resided in the countryside. Her father owned the largest grain elevator in the area, and my father possessed the largest grain farm. Because our parents conducted business together, it was only natural that we would meet, attend school together, and become friends. I won't bore you with stories of grade school crushes, high school romances, or even our college experiences. Both of us dated and, yes, had relationships with other people. We hadn't committed exclusively to each other, but deep down, I suppose we both knew we should be a couple. I happened to be her first, but along the way, there were others for both of us. It was during our junior year at the University of Illinois when we decided to be exclusive, and later on, I asked her to marry me. About a year and a half after that, just 1 week after graduating, we tied the knot. We both earned degrees in business administration. Life was great, or at least I thought it was until that fateful July night. But let me continue. 3 years ago, Kelly's parents retired and relocated to Phoenix, Arizona. Kelly, her sister Amber, and her 2 brothers, Tom and Carl Gentry, bought a 48% stake in the grain business from their father, Tom Sr. He wished to maintain controlling interest for a few years to provide financial support for their growth. Eventually, he'd decrease his stake until they owned the business entirely. Amber is married to a friend of mine, Walter Swanson, known as Wally, who's also a grain farmer. He manages a farm just slightly smaller than mine. We live nearby and enjoy spending time with them. Tom and Carl jointly manage the grain business, while Kelly serves as the controller, handling the financial aspects. Amber works at the facility, dealing with customers and managing grain sales transactions. It's a true family-run business with a few additional employees, primarily truck drivers and grain handlers. During the peak harvest season, they hire a few part-time workers as well. That's enough background. Let's delve into the unfortunate story of how I discovered my wife engaging with another man online and what unfolded afterward. All 4 of the Gentry children put in a tremendous effort to finalize the deal for the grain business purchase from their father. While I wasn't heavily involved, I knew they had to work diligently to make it happen. There were meetings with banks, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, insurers, and many more. They were all quite exhausted after completing the deal. Thankfully, all of this occurred during the winter, which was the slowest season for them. For me, it was after the harvest season, so I didn't require Kelly's assistance on the farm as much as I would during my 2 busiest times of the year. While she didn't participate in the actual farming work, Managing 2,200 acres of corn and soybeans kept me extremely busy during those times, and I relied on Kelly for running errands and various tasks. So, since our schedules weren't hectic, Kelly and Amber decided they wanted to take a few days off and go to a spa to relax and unwind. They booked a spa for a 3-night getaway. The ladies returned from their spa retreat feeling relaxed and rejuvenated. They decided to repeat the experience that July, once the planting season was over. The following year, they scheduled another weekend at the spa. It was during this particular spa visit that I came across the online video. Dan Marvel, the field agent for the Illinois Department of Agriculture in our county, happened to stop by during a routine tour of his area of responsibility. Kelly and I had known Dan since college, and when he inquired about her, I mentioned that she was on a getaway at P-Spas. Dan gave me a curious look and mentioned that something strange was happening there, something I might want to investigate. He explained that a cousin of his used to work at that spa as a masseuse and had shared some rather scandalous stories about what went on there. He mentioned there was a website with a different name, possibly related to Pleasures. Although he was hesitant to go into details, he suggested I look into it. I'm an internet enthusiast who enjoys browsing for interesting content, so that evening I decided to explore and eventually stumbled upon P-Spa. Finding the live feed was quick, and the show began. I could recount the events of that night, but what's the point? I experienced hurt, tears, anger, depression, and a whirlwind of emotions a man typically goes through when discovering his wife's infidelity. I soon discovered it wasn't the first time she had cheated because P-Spa had an archive section, and I was able to access videos from their previous 2 visits, along with videos from the 2 previous nights that Kelly and Amber had been there. With a premium membership, I had the option to download each video for an extra $20 per video. In total, I downloaded 8 videos at a cost of $160. For a total of $260, I had all the evidence I'd ever need to file for divorce from my wife. I just hadn't figured out my plan yet, but I knew I had to start immediately. I wouldn't wait for a month, 2 weeks, or even a single week to take action. In my mind, the sooner we separated, the better. I had video proof that she had closeness with another man at least 8 times. In fact, she had closeness with at least 2 different men, Mario and Steve, in the videos I had downloaded. I didn't know, and frankly, I didn't care if there had been more than 2 men involved. 2 was more than enough. I created several DVD copies of the videos and stored them in a highly secure location. When my father built our house, he installed a wall safe accessible through a hidden panel in the built-in bookcase in the office. Once the copies were safely hidden, I removed all references to Nature's Pleasure Spa from my computer and deleted all the original files. Aside from the DVD copies, there was no longer a trace of the evidence. With everything sorted, I picked up my cell phone and sent a text message to Kelly on her cell phone. "Kelly, this is Jack. I happen to know exactly what you're doing at P-Spas, and I have evidence to prove it. Don't bother returning to the house if you decide to come back at all. This house is no longer your home, and soon I won't be your husband. We're done. My lawyer will get in touch with you in the next few days. Arrangements can be made for you to collect your personal belongings at that time." It appeared that Kelly had turned off her cell phone and didn't receive my text message until the next morning, as I didn't hear anything from her that night. However, early the following day, my phone started ringing. I could see from the caller ID that it was Kelly, so I chose not to answer. Shortly after, she left me a voicemail. "Jack, what on earth are you talking about, honey? I have no idea what's going on there, but why would you send me such terrible messages? Amber and I are packing up now, and I'll be home in a couple of hours. I don't understand what you think I did, but you're mistaken. I'll talk to you when I get there, and then we can sort this out. I love you, Jack." Shortly after, my cell phone rang once more, and again, I chose not to answer it, letting it go to voicemail. It was essentially the same message, almost word for word. I couldn't help but wonder if she had prepared what she was going to say. When I ignored the call, it didn't take long for another text message to arrive. She seemed like a broken record, as she repeated nearly the exact words from her 2 phone messages. Since I didn't have to have an actual conversation with her, I decided to send her a brief reply via text to confirm that I had received her messages, but had opted not to talk to her. I simply texted her, "I wonder if Mario would have any idea about, what in the world are you talking about, honey?" if I asked him. "Why don't you have him call me and I will ask him?" What I said about not coming back to the house, I meant, "Do not think you can come home. It's over, Kelly. I didn't receive any more texts. But later that afternoon, I got another phone call from Kelly. She left a message. Jack, we need to talk. I'm staying with Amber until you and I can have a conversation and resolve this terrible misunderstanding. Please call my cell phone and talk to me. Update. The next morning, I visited my bank and set up a second safe deposit box in my name alone. I placed one copy of the DVDs in that box, along with the original prenuptial agreement. I had also created an extra copy of the prenuptial agreement, since I had a meeting with my lawyer scheduled for 11 a.m. While I was confident that my lawyer already had a copy, I didn't want to leave anything to chance. When the time came, I entered my lawyer's office, and to my surprise, Kelly was already there. She appeared disheveled, her eyes showing signs of crying, and her hair in disarray. Kelly told me, Jack, we need to discuss this. I inquired, how did you know I had an appointment here? She replied, Richard called me when you set up the meeting. At that moment, Richard Warner, my attorney, emerged from his office and invited both of us to enter. My anger simmered beneath the surface, so I retorted, No, Richard, we won't be going into your office together. Your call to Kelly has shattered my trust, and I need a clear answer from you right now. I asked pointedly, Will you represent me? Only me? Lawyers are supposed to be intelligent, but it seems this guy missed out on a fair share of brains because he stated, No, Jack, if this continues, I will be representing Kelly. As it turned out, he considered the grain business a better client than my farming business. Perhaps this was due to his representation of the Gentry family members involved in the grain business. I held my own view on this matter, believing that he would eventually realize the mistake in his judgment. Fine, Richard, please ensure that all my original documents and any available copies of contracts and paperwork are in your possession and made available to me by 4 p.m. today. I will either pick them up myself or arrange for a courier to retrieve them. I added, I want you to understand that I've appreciated your past work for me. However, you're making a significant error here, Richard. I'll be seeking legal services elsewhere, and my new attorney will contact you soon. Kelly had remained silent throughout this exchange, but then asked in a pleading tone, Jack, why won't you talk to me now to clear this up? I responded, Because, Kelly, it's evident that Richard values you as a client more than he values me. I won't engage in this conversation with you without legal representation, and I don't trust him. Richard chimed in saying, Jack, you know I've always been straightforward with you, so you have nothing to fear. In my mind, I thought, Oh, Richard, I have plenty to fear. You can't serve two masters, as they say, and it's clear whom you've chosen to prioritize. Besides, you've already demonstrated your untrustworthiness when you called Kelly in here. Goodbye, my attorney will be in touch, I declared. And as I walked out, I could hear Kelly beginning to cry again. Darn it, now I had to find a new attorney. Well, I knew that David Warner was a very skilled attorney and had a strong competitive streak against Richard Warner. I thought that might be a good choice, but I didn't want to rush into it without some research. Attorneys, accountants, bankers, and insurance agents are professionals you closely associate with, and you need to be absolutely sure about them before getting involved. I understood that attorney-client relationships are highly important because they often involve confidential information. Since I knew a few people who had used David's services, I called his law office and asked if they could provide a list of references. The secretary said they did indeed have a list and was happy to send it to me via email. On the list, I noticed there were 4 friends of mine, so I decided to visit 3 of them and get their opinions on David's work. It didn't take much time because all 3 of them quickly gave me glowing recommendations for David. I had no doubt that he would handle my case well. I skipped visiting the 4th friend, Wally, because he's married to Amber, Kelly's sister, and I didn't want to involve him. I called David's office a second time, introduced myself, and asked if I could schedule a meeting with him after 4 p.m. The receptionist informed me that he was busy until 4:30 p.m., but would check with him to see if he could meet with me after that. I knew there was a chance he might not be available, but I had to give it a shot. When she got back on the line, she told me that Mr. Warner would meet with me at 4:30 p.m., but it would have to be a brief meeting because he had other commitments in the evening. I agreed to that and mentioned I would arrive shortly before 4:30 p.m. She replied, I look forward to seeing you at that time, Mr. Hagan. By the way, my name is Samantha. I am David's wife. At 4 p.m., I swung by Richard's office to collect my paperwork, but they hadn't finished copying it all. It was evident they were stalling, probably hoping I'd change my mind. I must admit, I lost my temper and told them that I needed every piece of my legal paperwork within the next 15 minutes. Otherwise, my new attorney would be reaching out to them. They asked who that might be, and I told them they'd find out soon enough. That office became really busy after that. I believe they had 3 people making copies all at once, and 20 minutes later, I had every sheet. I still had enough time to make it to David's office for my appointment, so I didn't complain further about being late to meet my deadline. I had my meeting with David, and he agreed to be my personal and business attorney. I asked if I could leave all the paperwork I had gathered with him for safekeeping, and he consented to keep it in his vault until we could go over it together. We scheduled a meeting for the next day, Tuesday, at 9 a.m. to review all the paperwork and formulate a plan for my divorce. When I left the office at 5:30 p.m., I smiled at Samantha and asked, "Well, Samantha, am I causing you trouble, or are your evening plans still on track?" She smiled back and said, "You did just fine, Mr. Hagen. Our evening is proceeding as planned. I wish all our clients were as punctual as you've been. But please call me Sam from now on." "Thank you, Sam, and please call me Jack." The next morning, we went through all my business paperwork and contracts. I can't discuss the details here due to attorney-client privilege. However, I can tell you that David believed everything seemed in order from a business perspective. We paused for lunch, and David and Sam invited me to join them at the local diner. I agreed and met them there, as I needed to stop at my bank before we continued in the afternoon. They were a delightful couple, and we had a very pleasant lunch together. I learned that they were both a few years older than me, and David mentioned that he was in the same grade as Tom Gentry, but that they weren't close. I suppose they were too competitive with each other. I discovered that they'd been married for about 10 years and had 2 daughters aged 6 and 3. They showed me pictures, and the 2 little ones were very charming, taking after their mom, I could see. Both had beautiful smiles just like Sam. I think that lunch did me a world of good. It made the transition into a relationship with my new attorney much easier. However, the downside was that I realized my life partner wasn't with me anymore. David and Sam were such a great couple, and reminded me so much of how things had been with Kelly before I found out about her affair. It made me sad, and a couple of times I could feel my eyes welling up. David didn't seem to notice, but I could tell that Sam had picked up on it, and concern crossed her face. After lunch, I visited the bank and made some adjustments to safeguard my assets. I also obtained a $5,000 check made out to David Warner Law Offices as a retainer for their forthcoming work. David hadn't requested it yet, but I thought he'd appreciate the gesture. Returning to the office around 1:30 p.m., I was ready to continue our meeting. Sam informed me that David was on the phone and led me to the small conference room where we had been meeting. She inquired if I wanted coffee or anything else, and I declined, saying I was fine. She sat down beside me in one of the chairs and extended her hand. "David didn't inform me about the specifics, Jack, but I can sense the nature of this afternoon's discussion based on your demeanor during lunch. I noticed you're wearing a wedding ring, so I assume it's related to your wife. If you permit, I'd like to ask David to allow me to sit in on your meeting this afternoon as we address whatever it is you need to share with us." I was on the brink of breaking down again, so I just nodded my consent. My anger had subsided for the moment, and it seemed the hurtful emotions were more prevalent. It felt reassuring to have a woman nearby with her natural sensitivity. I realized that I might indeed require Sam's sympathetic presence. During the afternoon meeting, I recounted the entire story of discovering Kelly's infidelity. I did break down a couple of times, and Sam stepped in to offer sympathy and solace. After regaining control of my emotions, I outlined my intentions. Unless circumstances change my mind, I plan to file for divorce and enforce the terms of the prenuptial agreement. David and I thoroughly reviewed the prenuptial agreement, and its terms are essentially as follows. I retain 100% ownership of all farm assets, real estate, and personal property. Kelly retains 100% ownership of the grain business assets. If there has been no infidelity, Kelly is entitled to 50% of our financial assets. However, if infidelity is proven, Kelly only receives $25,000 for each year of unfaithfulness, not 50%. I also only get $25,000 for each year of unfaithfulness, not 50%. Household personal property is divided equally, regardless of the circumstances. David inquires about my need to provide evidence of infidelity. I respond to him, explaining that I have the evidence but won't reveal it at this moment or to anyone else unless it becomes necessary for a court presentation, in which case I would show it to the judge. Despite my response, David persists, expressing his need to see the evidence to confirm the case of infidelity and to be certain. I reassure David, telling him he needs to trust me. I mention that I possess the evidence but also emphasize my concern for Kelly, stating that I don't want anyone else to witness what I've seen unless it's absolutely necessary. Sam touches David's arm and nods in agreement. Eventually, David reluctantly consents. Over the next couple of days, Kelly made multiple phone calls and left voicemail messages for me. I did not answer her calls and deleted the messages without listening to them. David also contacted me and informed me that we had scheduled a meeting for Thursday involving myself, Kelly, David, and Richard. Update! During the meeting on Thursday, I plan to ask Kelly some questions. How she responds will decide if I go through with the divorce and on what grounds. Let's see how things unfold. On Thursday at 10:30 a.m., David and I went to Richard's office to meet with him and Kelly. When we got there, Kelly's car was already in the parking lot, so we entered the office. Richard's assistant guided us to a small conference room where we waited for a few minutes before Richard and Kelly joined us. Kelly looked much better than she did when I saw her at Richard's office earlier in the week. She had clearly made an effort to look nice for the meeting because she appeared beautiful. I did my best to hide my feelings because I didn't want her to see how much I still cared for her. She smiled at me and said, "Jack, I hope we can finally talk and clear up this misunderstanding. I miss you and want to come home." I didn't reply because I was afraid my voice would break if I spoke. I needed to regain control of my emotions. It wouldn't be easy, but I had to do it. David spoke up, saying, "We're here to discuss the divorce process for ending Jack and Kelly's marriage. I believe we should start by allowing both of them to express their thoughts and opinions on how this young couple can move forward." Richard nodded and added, "My client believes this is all a big misunderstanding and is eager to resolve the issues with her husband." I had been struggling to manage my emotions, but Richard did me a favor by reigniting my anger. Right now, my anger was boiling, and I knew I could control it, making it easier to manage my emotions, hurt, and disappointment in Kelly. I would be okay. I said, "That works for me, Richard. Your client can talk to her husband." I looked across the table at Kelly and continued, "Kelly, here are the facts. When we got married, we signed a prenuptial agreement. We updated it 2 years ago when you joined your father's business. I've brought copies of the updated agreement for everyone to have." Kelly appeared a bit shocked and said quietly, "But Jack, I don't want a divorce. I want to be your wife. Why can't we just move past this misunderstanding and go home to be happy again?" I somewhat brushed over her comment and went on. Our intention was to protect our individual interests while still enjoying the benefits of our marriage. Initially, the prenuptial agreement was to safeguard assets in my family for generations. Then, when you joined your father's business, it was also meant to protect the assets that have been in your family for a long time. In case of a divorce, our agreement is very clear. I will keep 100% of the assets from my family, and you will keep 100% of the assets from your family. Any debts related to these business assets will belong to the respective business, and the other party won't be responsible. Since we both contributed to our marital assets, our agreement outlines specific ways to split money and property, depending on the circumstances of our divorce. As you can see from this document, you have the right to all your personal belongings like clothing, jewelry, your car, and other things that typically don't concern men. Similarly, I have the same right to my belongings. All other non-farm personal property, such as furniture, artwork, electronics, etc., will be divided equally between us. Farm personal property like grain bins and machinery and amp equipment, etc., will remain entirely mine, as they are essential for the farming operation. The financial division for you during a divorce would be 50% of our assets if there was no infidelity. However, there are 2 exceptions in case of infidelity as mentioned in the document. If you divorce me due to infidelity, I would receive only $25,000 per year, or a total of $200,000, not 50%. If I divorce you due to infidelity, the distribution would be $25,000 per year, or $200,000 in total, not 50%. I'm going to ask you some questions, Kelly. Your answers will determine if I proceed with the divorce and on what grounds. This will also affect the outcome of any financial settlements. If we want to save our marriage, Kelly, you must answer every question truthfully. If you refuse or I catch you lying, it's over. Do you understand? Are you willing to do this to give our marriage a chance? Kelly seemed shocked as I laid out the details of our prenuptial agreement. She quickly regained her composure and replied, "Yes, Jack, I will answer your questions honestly. I love you, and I want our marriage to survive. I'll do whatever it takes to make you stop this and let me come back home. Kelly, I'd like to record these questions. Is that okay with you?" This time she hesitated briefly and turned to Richard, who had been mostly quiet until now. Richard, being the typical lawyer, said, "Kelly, I would advise against it, but you should do what you think is best for you." My lawyer, David, spoke up. "Kelly, I agree with Richard. I wouldn't advise you or my client to record this, but it's Jack you need to convince, not Richard or me. Do what you feel is right." Kelly responded, "I'll do anything to resolve this misunderstanding. Yes, go ahead and record this. I'm okay with recording any conversation between Jack and me." David and I brought a tape recorder, so we placed it on the table where it could capture all the voices. Kelly inquired about my questions. I replied, explaining that I wanted to ask her about her faithfulness, breaking it down into 3 different time periods. The first period I mentioned extended from the time we committed to being exclusive until the day we got engaged. I asked if she had been faithful during that time. Kelly responded with a smile, stating that she had been faithful during that time. However, I pointed out that she had lied, marking it as lie number 1, and her smile turned to shock. I added that I considered walking out at that moment, but decided not to do so just yet. I asked Kelly if she hadn't been involved in an intimate encounter with Larry Evendale 2 days after we promised to be exclusive. I mentioned that Larry was known for bragging and that he had told me she invited him over on a Tuesday night when her parents were away, and they were intimate on her own bed. Before he left, he claimed that she really enjoyed it and that he expected more chances in the future, even after our marriage. I added that Amber overheard the conversation and assured me that Kelly loved me and wouldn't cheat again, urging me not to do anything foolish. I acknowledged that she had already told me a lie, but I could understand why she did it, even if I didn't like it. I decided to let that one go, but warned her that there would be no more passes and that she should be truthful from then on or face the consequences. I continued by explaining that after that incident, I didn't trust her, so I closely monitored her for the next 6 months. During that time, she didn't raise any suspicions, so I eventually proposed and gave her the ring she was wearing. I acknowledged that she might have wanted it sooner, but I wasn't ready to fully trust her. So she had to wait. I asked Kelly the second question, inquiring if she had cheated on me during our engagement, from the day she received the ring until our wedding day. Without hesitation, she responded with a firm, "No, absolutely not." I pretty much expected that answer. I explained that I believed it to be true because I still didn't fully trust her at that point. I mentioned that I had continued to keep an eye on her throughout that year until I felt confident about trusting her. I expressed that I was almost certain she had been faithful to me during that time. Richard, to his credit, suggested we take a break. He wanted to talk to his client and give her some time to collect herself. Both he and I noticed that during my discussion about Larry Evendale, Kelly became very emotional and was on the brink of breaking down. He wanted to let her regain her composure before we continued. So we decided to break for lunch. David and I picked up Sam and we headed to the local diner for the Blue Plate special. Sam asked how things were going and David said, "I think Jack is doing okay. Not much has come out yet, but he's laid the groundwork for an honest answer for the period when they were married. If Kelly confesses everything, he might still consider divorce, but he could also see that she genuinely wants to save the marriage. It'll be a tough call, but I think he can handle it. Of course, if she lies, Jack will have to decide how to proceed from there." Sam looked at me and seemed to sense my pain. I managed a weak smile and said, "This is incredibly tough, you know. Why do people do such foolish things, causing pain in their own lives and the lives of those they love?" She placed her hand on top of mine and said, "If only we could know, Jack, we'd give them a reality check before they made those foolish choices." That actually made me laugh, as did David. Even during these trying times, I could still find a way to laugh. I guess it's a testament to the resilience of people. People grieve at funerals but also find moments to laugh. I suppose it's the same with divorces. Amidst the grief, there can still be room for laughter. I grinned at Sam and said, "Thanks, Sam. I really needed that." She simply nodded. Shortly after 1 p.m., we returned to Richard's office to continue our meeting with Kelly. Before I asked the next question, I reminded her, "You must answer these questions with complete honesty. If you lie in any way, it'll be the end of this meeting and our marriage will have no chance. Do you understand?" Kelly replied, "Yes, I understand, and I'll tell you the truth." "Kelly," I inquired, "from the day we got married until now, did you ever cheat on me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and my heart ached for her. I knew this was painful for her, but I couldn't console her or let her off the hook. I needed her to care enough about our marriage to confess everything. I didn't know if I could prevent the divorce, but if she told me the complete truth, at least I'd know she wanted to try and save our marriage. "Yes, Jack, I did cheat on you. I'm so sorry, Jack. Can you ever forgive me?" I asked Richard and David to leave the room because I had more questions for Kelly, and I didn't want to embarrass her in front of those men. They objected, but I insisted that David leave. And Kelly nodded to Richard that she wanted him to leave as well. I had her confession of cheating on tape, which would be enough for a divorce hearing. I didn't want the rest of my questions and her answers on tape, so I turned it off. "Kelly, answer these questions. When, where, who, and why?" She sniffled a few times and said, "Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry. It happened this weekend at P-Spa. I cheated with one of the masseurs named Mario. I don't exactly know why it happened, Jack. I guess it was just a moment of passion. Amber and I had been having a great day, and after a wonderful dinner, we both decided to get a massage before going to bed." Kelly told me that her masseuse was Mario. She mentioned that she was on the massage table in the room, lying on her stomach, and how Mario began the massage, making her feel good. She admitted that Mario's hands felt soft and strong, and she didn't stop him. She added that at that moment, she had no idea things would go so far. She then started crying and said, "Oh, Jack, if I could go back, I never would have allowed it, and we wouldn't be where we are now. You have to believe me." I was shocked to hear all this, but I responded, "Even though this is shocking, Kelly, I am so sorry and I don't know what to say, but please forgive me, please." She sat there in silence, looking down and sniffling. After a while, she raised her head and gave me a questioning look. "Jack, is there any hope that you will forgive me?" Without making it sound like a courtroom, I asked, "Kelly, is this the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" She looked at me with a questioning and somewhat puzzled expression, as if she wondered how much I knew. Finally, she responded, "Yes, Jack, that is what happened. I am so sorry." At that moment, my heart was breaking, and against all odds, I managed to conceal the pain of her betrayal and my anger at her lies. I kept my composure, got up from the table, and signaled for David and Richard to return to the room. I looked at both men and firmly stated, "This meeting is over." Update. A robbery took place in my house, and although the detective found evidence of the robbery, they were uncertain about what was actually stolen. Let's see what happened next. After that, I walked towards the door and then turned around to address Kelly. I told her, "Kelly, I'm filing for divorce based on infidelity, and the terms of our prenuptial agreement will be upheld." She appeared shocked and asked, "But why, Jack?" "I confessed to my infidelity, and I'm begging you to forgive me and continue our marriage. Please, Jack, please. I love you so much. Please forgive me." I responded, "Kelly, you lied to me. You didn't care enough about our marriage to be completely honest. If you had been, I'm not even sure if I could have continued our marriage, but you didn't even give it a chance. You had the opportunity to come clean and be truthful, but you chose to lie. I know you were unfaithful more than just the one time with Mario, and I have the evidence. I warned you that you needed to tell the truth, and you didn't care enough about me or our marriage to do so. It's over." I turned back to the door, opened it, and began walking away. Kelly screamed, "Wait, Jack, I'll tell you everything you want to know. Please don't leave me." I turned around once more, glaring at her with a mixture of hurt and anger, and firmly said, "You were warned, you had your chance, and you thought you could get away with only admitting to one incident. So you lied. You had your chance, Kelly." I shouted back at her, "It's over." David quickly followed me and caught up as I was getting into my car. He grabbed my arm and asked, "Do you really want to file for infidelity?" I replied, "Yes, I do." She had her chance. I must have misjudged her all these years. I wanted her to care enough to confess everything, but she couldn't even be honest with me now. Go ahead and file. I drove to our house, which was now my house, and grabbed a beer from the refrigerator. In fact, I grabbed two and entered my office. I sat at my desk and quickly drank the first one, then sipped the second as I contemplated everything that had transpired. I had several copies of the video downloads hidden in secure spots, but I didn't think I'd need to make them public since I had her confession. My head jerked up when I realized that I had left the tape in the office. I promptly called David and asked, "Hey, it's Jack. Did you grab the tape recording of Kelly's confession before you followed me?" "Oh no," I heard him say. "I forgot the tape, Jack. I rushed out after you to catch you, and I completely forgot about the tape. I'm so sorry, Jack." I'd been meticulous in planning everything, and then, in my moment of hurt and anger, I had messed it up by storming out without the tape. Damn. I suggested, "David, why don't you give Richard a call and see if you can go over there to retrieve it?" But my guess is they might say something like, "We thought you had everything you needed when you left, so we just erased everything. Sorry. I'll be surprised if you can actually get it. But don't worry, even if you can't, I have enough evidence to file for infidelity anyway." David responded, "Okay, man, I'm sorry. I know you didn't want to use the video downloads, and now you might have to if she contests the infidelity charge." I reassured him, "Don't worry about it, David. Everything will work out." After I ended the call with David, I grabbed another beer from the refrigerator. Damn, how could I be so careless? I wasn't drunk, but I was numb as I watched the evening news before heading to bed. I thought I heard a vehicle pull into the yard, so I slowly rose from my chair and went to the back door. I walked onto the porch and saw a dark shape just before the lights went out. Something hit me on the back of the head, and then all I saw was blinding light before drifting into total darkness. I heard a beeping sound, and I opened my eyes to look around as best I could without moving. I had learned my lesson from the first time. I saw a nurse sitting in the chair beside me. I tried to turn, but I couldn't move. "Hi, Jack. I'm Susan, and I'm your nurse. Please don't try to move, okay? Everything will be okay, and I'll explain everything to you, but please stay still. Do you understand me?" I felt something in my throat, but I managed to nod my head a little to show that I understood. "Jack, I need to go tell the doctor that you've regained consciousness, and then we'll be right back in here, okay?" I nodded once more to indicate my understanding. It was becoming clear to me that I must have been injured and was in the hospital. However, I couldn't remember anything about how it had occurred. I assumed that someone would eventually fill me in, so I lay there with my eyes closed until I sensed their presence again. "Mr. Hagen, or Jack," said Dr. Julius. "I am Dr. Julius. You sustained multiple injuries from a beating during a home robbery. Now that you've regained consciousness, I'm quite certain you'll recover, but we had to restrain you to prevent further injury from sudden movements. I'm sure you felt the intense pain when you tried to move yesterday. Am I correct?" I managed a slight smile as I nodded to acknowledge the pain. "Yes, we should have been more proactive with the restraints to spare you that pain. I apologize for that. I think we can remove the restraints now, Nurse Johnson. But, Mr. Hagen, please refrain from attempting any independent movements just yet, all right?" I nodded and gestured toward the tube in my throat. "Yes, we can also take out the ventilator now. Nurse Johnson will handle it." They removed the restraints and the tube, and my throat was in excruciating pain. I couldn't speak initially, but after some time, I was given a sip of water, and I could speak, though my voice was raspy and painful, so I spoke in a whisper. "Could someone please tell me what happened to me?" Dr. Julius explained. "Jack, it's 7 a.m. and you've just regained consciousness and been taken off the ventilator. Your throat will be sore for a while, and for now, we'd like you to rest. Nurse Johnson will stay with you, and after some time to recover, we'll contact the police to let them know you're ready to talk. They can provide you with all the details of what occurred." He continued, "I can tell you that medically, you have some injuries. The EMTs arrived in time to revive you, and we were able to reinflate your lung. To be straightforward, you've been physically assaulted. We'll closely monitor your condition for a few more days, and then you'll likely be discharged. As promised, I had the rest of that day to rest, with Nurse Johnson nearby the entire time. By later that afternoon, I could sit up with significant assistance and use the restroom. Susan, Nurse Johnson, and I had a chance to chat, and I learned that she was a schoolmate from about 3 years behind me. She was known as Susan Fisk back then, but she had married Chad Johnson and had a 3-year-old daughter named Emily. Similar to Kelly, it turned out that Chad, too, had been unfaithful, leading to their divorce. I shared the story of what had been happening with Kelly, and naturally she was quite understanding. The following morning, bright and early, I had a visit from 2 police detectives, Harold Robbins and Josh Carter. Before they could dive too deep into their questioning, I asked them to brief me on what had transpired. Detective Robbins explained, "It appears that this was a robbery that resulted in an attack on you. We found a 2x4 on the porch near you, and it had traces of your hair and blood. There were no fingerprints on it, so we assumed that the person who used it was wearing gloves. The door to your house showed no signs of forced entry, but that's because you came out onto the porch and the door was already open." He went on, "When we searched your house, we noticed that several pictures had been taken off the walls. There was an empty strongbox in one of the desk drawers, and all the file cabinets in the office had been rifled through. In the bedrooms, the drawers and closets had been searched, and there were empty compartments in a jewelry box in the master bedroom. While we see signs of a robbery, we're uncertain about what was actually taken." Detective Carter chimed in, "Once you're able to return home, you'll need to assess things to the best of your ability and determine what's missing. The doctor indicated it might be another 3 or 4 days before you can go home. At that point, we'll review everything with you, and you can help us update our reports." Detective Robbins took the lead again, indicating it was time to pose some questions. "What do you recall about the attack and the events that followed?" "Well," I replied, "I'm afraid it's not much. I'd had a couple of beers and was watching the evening news when I heard a vehicle pull into the yard. I got up to see what was going on, stepped out onto the porch, and saw a shadowy figure in the darkness just before the lights went out. I can't remember seeing or hearing anything else until yesterday. I fear I won't be of much help in solving who did this." Detective Robbins continued, expressing the need to ask a few questions that might aid their investigation, and inquired about my wife's whereabouts during the incident. I informed the detective that my wife and I were separated and going through a divorce, so I honestly didn't know where she was at the time. The detective then asked if he could call me Jack, to which I agreed. He inquired about the progress of our divorce proceedings and whether there was a lot of conflict between us. I responded, saying it wasn't going well, as she was challenging the grounds I planned to file for. He further questioned the grounds for the divorce, and I explained that I intended to file for infidelity, and her settlement would be significantly lower under those terms, which she was disputing. The detective commented that this provided her with a motive. I added, "Detective, I just can't believe she'd do anything to harm me. I can't believe it." He reassured me, saying they would examine that closely as part of their investigation. He asked if there were any other individuals who might have a motive to harm me, and inquired about any disputes with neighbors, friends, family, or anyone else. I replied, "No, I can't think of anything." The detective then mentioned the need to conduct a thorough inventory of what's missing when I was able, and he asked if there was any cash in the house, possibly in the strongbox, and if so, how much. He also asked if there were any other valuable items in the house, such as jewelry and artworks, worth thousands of dollars or more. I told them, yes, there was some cash in the strongbox. I'd estimate it was around $8,000. I usually keep about $10,000 in cash on hand, but I've used some of it recently, so it's probably around $8,000. There were a few nice pieces of jewelry, but none valued over $1,000. I can't think of anything else of significant value at the moment. I decided not to mention the hidden safe behind the bookcase at this point. The detective hadn't brought it up, and I was fairly certain no one had discovered it. I wanted to keep it a secret if possible. The detective told me, "Well, Jack, I think that's all for today. If you remember anything else, please don't hesitate to call me. When you're ready to return home, let us know so we can do the inventory. If we have more questions, we'll either visit you here or at your home." Over the next 4 days, I gradually improved. I had plenty of naps, and at times I sat and chatted with Susan. I had several visitors, including Wally, Amber, David, and Sam. Kelly didn't come to see me, and apart from Amber, none of her family visited either. Given the circumstances, it was understandable, but I would have welcomed the company. Richard, Kelly's attorney, did come to see me. We had been friends for years before the divorce began, and I was glad for his visit. Everyone expressed their sympathy for my injury and wished me a speedy recovery. Both Amber and Sam kissed me on the cheek before leaving, and I could see tears welling up in their eyes. I had a rough time during those 4 days. Even though I slept, I had some pretty unsettling dreams. Sometimes I'd wake up feeling panicked, with my heart racing and tears in my eyes. A few times I'd wake up not knowing where I was, but it seemed like Susan was always there to comfort me with her gentle words and touches. I'm pretty sure I even woke myself up with a scream once, though I couldn't remember the details of the scary dreams. Later on, I learned that Susan stayed at the hospital with me, even when she was off duty. She only left to freshen up and change her clothes each day. She told me it was because of the troubles in my marriage, and she wanted to be there for me. I was truly grateful for her support. Dr. Julius came to let me know that I'd be discharged soon. I was relieved and quickly got ready to leave. Susan helped me prepare, and she even wheeled me down to the lobby, where Wally and Amber were waiting to take me home. Susan wished me good luck and gave me a warm hug. I could tell she cared about me, but my life was in chaos, with problems in my marriage and my health, so I didn't pursue a deeper relationship with her. I mentioned that I'd like to call her sometime in the future, and that was the extent of it. Update. As soon as I entered my house, I could see the mess that still lingered there. Wally and Amber offered to help me clean up, but I told them I'd prefer to leave things as they were for now, until I had a chance to go through everything. I assured them I'd call them when I was ready for their help, and they reluctantly agreed, leaving me alone. My first task was to check the safe behind the bookcase in my office. To my relief, everything was intact, including a significant amount of cash, certificates of deposit, stocks, bonds, and the DVD containing evidence of Kelly's infidelity. It was clear that no one had discovered the safe, or they would have taken these valuables as well. I inspected the rest of the office and noticed that, aside from the cash, my laptop computer, and a few numbered prints of Wildlife by Terry Redlin, nothing seemed to be missing. However, I did see bank statements and credit card statements laid out on the desk, so I alerted both the bank and credit card companies to be on the lookout for any unusual activity. Over a couple of weeks, the investigation into the robbery and assault progressed slowly, because the police lacked any substantial evidence that could lead to a suspect. Detectives Robbins and Carter provided regular updates on their work, but no new leads had surfaced. They explained that due to the absence of high-value items being stolen, tracking down potential culprits through fences, as in some cases, was a dead end. During their last update, they implied that the case might be put on hold unless significant evidence emerged. In the initial stages of the investigation, they had questioned me about Kelly and me. I had been cooperative and forthcoming for the most part. I strongly believed that Kelly wouldn't harm me and that taking items she would have received in the divorce didn't make sense. It seemed the detectives shared this perspective, as their inquiries regarding Kelly didn't lead to anything substantial. I decided to open new bank accounts and order new checks, because I had concerns that my old accounts might have been compromised to some extent. Fortunately, I could account for all the activity on my old accounts, but I felt more secure with the new ones in place. I also acquired a new laptop computer and reorganized my office, getting back to work as usual. I sat down to handle some overdue bills and found an invoice from Red SS Inc. A sudden realization hit me for the first time since the robbery. REDS stood for Remote Electronic Data Storage Solutions. I had video surveillance of my property, covering the house, grain bins, and machine shed. This footage was sent to the computer in my grain office near the bins and dryer. Every night, it was uploaded to Reds as a backup. They retained this data, and I paid a monthly fee based on the amount of data they stored. Normally, each month, I'd delete the oldest data to manage the fees. However, I hadn't deleted anything since the robbery. I had video evidence. Without hesitation, I logged into Red SS's website and selected the day of the robbery from their archives. I downloaded the entire day onto my laptop to review it. My hope was that the video quality would be sufficient to identify the culprits who had assaulted and robbed me. If it met my expectations, I planned to create a copy on a DVD and provide it to Detectives Robbins and Carter to jumpstart their investigation. As I went through the footage, it became clear that there was nothing valuable to share with the detectives, leading me to believe that they might not solve the case. With the bills paid, I started outlining my path forward in life. I decided to reach out to an old college friend who worked at Cargill, one of the largest grain merchandisers in the United States. Through my connection, I arranged a meeting with the decision-makers in their acquisition department. It was astounding how personal connections could make things happen. After about 2 weeks, I had finalized my plans with Cargill, and I also took a brief trip to Las Vegas. I flew to Phoenix due to some business there and then returned home to set my plans in motion. I contacted David and had him arrange a meeting with Kelly, her brothers Tom and Carl, and her sister Amber at Gentry Grain. I instructed him to mention that, with the impending divorce, the state's grain reserves might no longer suffice because they couldn't include my grain storage. I wanted to discuss the situation with them and find a resolution. Apparently, David's message surprised them, but they agreed readily to meet with me. It seemed they hadn't considered the implications of my grain no longer being part of the equation. I walked into the office and greeted everyone. "Hello, Tom, Carl, Amber, Kelly. I assume you understood one of the reasons I felt we should sit down and resolve some issues." Tom began to speak, but I raised my hand and said, "I initiated this meeting, so I suggest you all just sit here and listen to what I have to say before making any comments. I genuinely believe it's in everyone's best interest if you do that. First, I'd like to address this divorce matter. I apologize, Kelly." I placed the final draft of the divorce papers on the table in front of Kelly and requested, "Please sign these." She responded, "Jack, I don't want a divorce. Whatever you think I did isn't worth throwing away all the good years we've had. I wish you could forgive me and work through our problems. I certainly don't want to do this here in front of my brothers and sister. Kelly, we're going to conclude this now. There's no future for our marriage, and the sooner you sign these papers, the sooner we can both move on with our lives." She blushed and said, "Well, if you insist on divorcing me, I still plan to contest the infidelity issue. It's the least you can do for me." I knew she would play that card, and I was prepared. "If you choose to fight me on the infidelity issue, Kelly, I'll have no choice but to present this DVD as evidence in court." I placed a copy of the DVD on the table alongside the divorce papers. "In case you're wondering, it's a video showing all 8 times you cheated on me at the spa." Amber's face turned bright red and she glared at Kelly, expressing her disbelief and disappointment in Kelly's actions toward me. I chimed in, confirming that Kelly had indeed avoided Mario and Steven, and I emphasized that I had 8 videos of her avoiding them, which I believed would resolve the infidelity issue. I gave her an ultimatum to sign the divorce papers or face court proceedings, making it clear that I was no longer willing to play games with her. I could see that Tom and Carl were also shocked by the revelation, and Amber was quietly crying. Kelly eventually signed the divorce papers, and I left her a copy while placing the rest in my briefcase. Kelly appeared numb, with unshed tears in her eyes, and I noted her shock at the evidence I had to prove multiple instances of infidelity. Moving on to the matter of the grain situation, I addressed the group, acknowledging their shock and assuring them that I would be brief despite the unfortunate news. I explained that due to the divorce, they would no longer have the value of my stored grain included in their reserves, which would put them in violation of their grain license and loan agreements. On a positive note, I informed them that I had purchased their father's 52% stake in the business, emphasizing that their agreement with him lacked a first right of refusal clause, which had made the purchase relatively straightforward. I mentioned that he was aware of the company's need for my equity and believed I had evidence of Kelly's infidelity, making it an easy decision for him. Consequently, I had become the majority shareholder in Gentry Grain Inc., and they each owned 12%, making them the minority with a 48% stake. I then explained that I had negotiated a deal to sell my controlling interest in Gentry Grain to Cargill, a company constantly seeking promising grain operations. I mentioned the option for them to sell their shares at the same price I negotiated, which I considered favorable. However, the downside was that their company was now owned by someone else, and the new owners would assess personnel to determine their contributions to the company. I pointed out the upside that, as part of my negotiations, they each had a 1-year guaranteed job security. I encouraged them to work hard to prove their worth during that time. Additionally, I disclosed that I had sold my farm and Wally's farm to Cargill, with Wally entering a long-term contract to manage both farms for them, given his excellent performance. The shock I observed on their faces deepened, now mixed with a degree of anger. Tom, being the eldest and the unofficial leader of the Gentry family, was the first to voice his concerns. "What on earth have you done, Jack? You've ruined this family business because my sister cheated on you. What kind of man are you anyway? How did you convince my father to sell you his shares? What lies did you tell him?" "Let me clarify, Tom," I replied. "Your father sold me his shares to keep you, Carl, and Kelly out of legal trouble. Instead of questioning the kind of man I am, you should be asking yourself what kind of people your siblings are. I placed the second DVD in the center of the table. This video will provide all the answers you seek about why this is all happening. It unmistakably captures your pickup truck in my yard on the night I was assaulted. It unmistakably shows you and Carl assaulting me. It clearly captures you exiting my house with my belongings. Consider yourselves fortunate that I chose this path of vengeance rather than handing it over to Detectives Robbins and Carter. Kelly finally spoke up, expressing her dismay at my actions. I responded, telling her that our situation was different. I mentioned how I felt that I had wasted my entire life with her, emphasizing the way her family treated me and how she, too, had a sense of superiority over me, despite being my best friend. I accused her of being a deceitful partner, reminding her that she had promised to be faithful, but had promptly slept with Larry Evendale. I continued, stating that she had been an unfaithful spouse, disrespecting me and our marriage by being involved with those men. I mentioned that I had witnessed everything on the video, hearing every word. I confronted her with the fact that she had almost killed me in the attack, which, in my view, made her a terrible friend. Kelly fainted, and Amber and Carl rushed to her side, catching her before she fell. After she regained consciousness, I delivered my final blow by revealing that her father had sold me his shares to keep all three of them out of jail. I mentioned that he wasn't very proud of his children, except for Amber, and she would hear about it in the future. As I mentioned earlier, I declared that I believed I had wasted most of my life on her, but I wouldn't waste any more of my future. I wished her a wonderful life and then left the room, concluding all the negotiations. I felt free to move forward, and that's exactly what I intended to do.